everyone. This is Nick with Tenacity.ai with my co-host Jason. You're listening to the Cloud Cost Optimization Podcast. Today, we're going to dive into our next topic on FinOps, which is the core principles. And so we've hit on topics we've hit on topics around benefits and selling inside the organization. Now, I think it's important to back up and go back to sort of the core principles. What are you trying to achieve when you bring FinOps to your organization? So, Jason, let's kick it off with, I think we just jump right in. There are 6 principles. What's the first one? Let's drop it.
Teams need to collaborate. Well, that's probably one of the most important ones. It's like such a duh state. Yeah, right. It's like, duh. But, listen, man, the finance teams, the rest of the organization has not been brought along with the way that IT utilization and spending has changed. The variable cost model of the cloud has flipped that upside down for the finance people. It also has for engineers are used to just using and not worrying about what it costs. Finance teams are used to IT teams telling them what they're going to spend over a long period of time and then assigning CapEx to it. And now we don't assign a ton of CapEx to large projects, which was very predictable. Now, what I do today can greatly affect the profitability of today, right? As but as an engineer, the decisions I can make today can actually affect the profitability immediately. And so the collaboration comes as this is why, how we've been saying this forever, Nick, that the whole organization, especially finance, looks at IT as a cost center, right? I mean, it's very common, right? And part of that is because IT teams haven't done a good enough job of making sure they communicate what they're doing, how they're doing it, and why they're doing it to the rest of the organization. And so to me, part of this teams needs to collaborate is to get rid of this notion that IT departments, and quote unquote, are cost centers, because in every single one of these organizations, you ask them what happens if all your IT goes down. They say, well, we can't process revenue. And I go, that's not a cost center then. That's actually required for revenue.
Yeah, and I'm going to amend your statement and just say, and vice versa, because it's not just that engineering needs to communicate better. It's also that you and I have experienced this in every organization I've been in, that a lot of times contentious relationships start to exist between organizations that just don't communicate very well. And Can you find 2 organizations that speak so different a language as finance and engineering? I mean, it's a completely different set. It's a different vocabulary.
It is.
And so when they speak at each other, and I do mean they oftentimes are not communicating. They're oftentimes, it becomes very anxious, and it can become contentious. And so, being able to align those organizations, to bring financial discipline and wisdom into the engineering team, and to bring sort of the innovation-driven, efficiency-driven, data-driven sort of outlook that engineers have into the finance team, you can start bringing communication, and that's true not just of those 2 organizations, it's product and the executive team and everything.
Completely agree with the vice versa. Absolutely, it's both ways.
And I want to bring it back to this point too of like collaboration. So much of the time, the reason it breaks down is anxiety. It really is. Like when spending feels out of control to the finance department, even if in engineering, it's not out of control, when it feels that way, they're anxious because they're being held accountable to budget and spending. And so
they don't know why.
Right. So being able to reduce their anxiety will help you collaborate. And I would liken it to the way that security teams and operational teams inside of IT have worked for a long time. In the early days of cybersecurity, it was such a contentious relationship because everyone had anxiety. And the best teams I've ever seen and the most secure organizations I've ever seen is where those 2 teams find a way to collaborate every single day by basically getting rid of each other's anxiety, right? Collaborate.
And speaking and learning how to adapt the way we talk to each other's context, right? Because
Right. Right.
both sides, right?
Yes.
That's why I think it's one of the most. It is one of the most important principles of FinOps, is because the rest of the principles, in my opinion, rely on strong collaboration internally. There's probably debates to be had on whether that's actually true or not, but I think communication, collaboration internally is the only way that you can adhere or apply the rest of the principles to your organization.
Perfect. All right. We spent 5 minutes on principle 1. So now we got to blitz through
It's
the
the
other
most
5.
important.
So it is.
All right.
Absolutely.
Reports should be accessible and timeable. Let's talk about, so let's wrap this one up real quick. If we're going to collaborate, we need to communicate across those things, and the data that we need to support that should be readily available when we're asked the questions on both sides, right?
So accessible and timely, definitely.
Correct.
Easy to get to, and should contain context for the recipient, and should be important to the sorts of decisions and actions they need to take. And this is where your tooling is going to be important. So think about your tooling when it comes to reporting. Doing this in Excel is a no-win way to do it. You actually do want to be thinking about the tooling to support FinOps in your org here. What else, Jason?
You choose the next one, your third most important one.
Well, I think one of the most important, I would argue, depending on the organization, this might be the most important, is data-driven decision making. So, making sure that decisions are actually driven by business value in the cloud. And I think this is easy to say. I think every organization says it. But I think nearly every organization I have been involved with, at least early on, has been very immature in actually doing it, especially when there's guesses of guesses happening, right? The legacy way of thinking about, say, product, guesses of guesses. The closer you get to actual real-time data and sharing that data collaboratively between teams, understanding kind of on a unit economics, trying to understand business drivers. What does it take to deploy a customer is a really good example. That's the simplest example. When you can understand the unit economics of deploying a customer, and then you can do it consistently over and over and show profitability every single time, you're now in the realm of where you're coming out of the low maturity and starting to move into a more mature model of thinking about data actually driving your business.
I do like this. This is the one I would have said for number 3 as well for me. And I don't know why we're stack ranking them, but I like to stack rank or, rank things like this. But the reason why I like it is 1, collaboration is the foundation. 2, reports we need to make sure we have the data. 3 is, what do I do with the data now that I have it? I need to use it to make better decisions. And so I completely agree. I would put this next on my list as well, that what do we do with the data that we're getting in these reports that are accessible and timely? We are now using those reports and that data to make better decisions driven by the value of business value to our organization from the cloud.
Number 4, Jason.
3 minutes. Take advantage of the variable cost model of the cloud. This is to me is again, it seems like a duh, but it isn't, is it? It is both. The entire organization does need to rethink how they utilize and leverage the cloud, right? So why don't you give us a little, what's your take on the taking advantage of the variable cost model of the cloud? What's the most important thing from that principle?
I'm going to say it a different way, because I have said this over and over, whether speaking or whether doing podcasts. The place you want to arrive when you're thinking about cloud optimization or when you're thinking about FinOps, is you want to arrive at the refactor phase, where you start thinking about all the components of your application from a perspective of how you can take advantage of the cloud. And so being able to take advantage of variable cost and the sorts of economics that can happen once you get out of a legacy mindset around your app and get into the cloud first or cloud native mindset around your app, this is extremely powerful, because I don't want my app consuming resources when the app's not being consumed.
Right.
And legacy models are built around persistent workloads that consume
Right.
Cloud all the time. And you want to get to this world where I can take advantage of those variable costs, where when my app needs resources, I'm spending some money. And when they don't, I'm frankly, I can see my costs dip and go down. And that's the place to arrive. This is huge. It's really hard. I would say in my experience, more than half of organizations say they're doing this. Less than 10% of them actually are.
Yeah. Yeah. You're talking about modernizing your entire application.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
that's
right.
taking advantage.
Right. So let me ask you this. If 2/3 of my environment is legacy compute like EC2 or Azure VM, am I taking advantage of the variable cost model of the cloud?
Probably not. I mean,
right.
It depends on how you're doing it, but 99% chance you're not. And
yeah, I mean, there's obviously some specific
okay.
workloads that this may be applicable to, obviously, like if you're running 100% CPU utilization on all of these resources. But yeah, right. I agree with you.
Yeah. I mean, listen, if 60% of your spending is because you're running dev there and you need dev to be on from 8 to 5 every day and you shut it down for the other 70% of the time, they actually are doing a pretty good job taking advantage of variable costs of the cloud. But that's not the norm. That's the 1% case.
Correct.
Really, you want to get to the point of where when you utilize the app, it's costing you something when you're not utilizing it. Your costs, they don't vanish, but they are largely reduced.
Right.
All right, Jason, number 5.
I like everyone takes ownership of their cloud usage. This is a good one, but
accountability.
Accountability, right? I think if you're not doing, to me anyway, the other principles that we've mentioned, it's very hard to hold your team accountable. So if you're not collaborating, if you don't have the data you need, if you're not making decisions using that data, and if you're not in some way, shape, or form from an organizational perspective taking advantage of the variable cost model of the cloud in the ways that we described, it's really hard to hold the team accountable and make sure that they're taking ownership of their cloud if you don't have some of the right things in place. So that's why I think this is obviously one of the most important outcomes of FinOps is that everybody takes ownership of the utilization of the cloud resources that you're using. I think it's really hard to go here first, though.
It is hard to go here first. This is another one of those things where a lot of people think they're doing it, or a lot of organizations think they're doing it, but then when you get the data, when we get to kind of our number 2, the actual reporting, and you see the data, you see the tag data, where those costs are going, you realize, that's when they have that pale-faced moment of, oh my gosh, we're not doing that good of a job of it. I remember implementing for an organization that we were working with, where they had thought that they were doing a great, and they were doing a great job in many respects around cloud optimization, but they thought that their entire environment was like tagged appropriately. And when we actually looked at the data, 76% of their environment was completely untagged and therefore not allocated out to the appropriate organizations from an accountability perspective. And I think that's a fairly common case, because we're good at kind of tagging the really important things, the really big, database server that everybody uses. Well, of course we tag that appropriately. It's the thing we work with every day. So we have done that. But when we look at, accountability from the perspective of kind of daily, the things that are getting spun up, a lot of times they're not appropriately being allocated out to the organizations that need those. And that's when you get into the case of a whole lot of waste and abandonment, et cetera. And, it's surprising when you do get accountability right and you do hold folks accountable, how quickly environments clean up. It's really stunning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Last one.
Centralized team. Cloud Center of Excellence is very similar to this. This is a very formal thing to me, but go ahead. You have something to add there.
Well, I was just going to say this is going to depend on the size of your organization.
Yeah.
So if you're one of the Fortune 500, you have an internal FinOps practice and you have a team. And, it's not necessarily that the FinOps team is doing FinOps. This is the FinOps team is helping enable the organization to collaborate and do FinOps. And so you will want to think of that team as to who the stakeholders are, who the folks are involved from an engineering, product team, finance team, procurement, et cetera, and how they're each going to play a role in this. If you're a smaller organization, this may be a very sort of individual one or two folk, led effort. But don't let that discourage you. That's where this starts, a grassroots effort as your cloud spending is going to increase. And it is. It's important to, get off the ground in the right way.
Yep. Absolutely. Completely agree. I think it's organization dependent, and the bigger you are, the more formal it would need to be. But you definitely need to make sure that you take the key stakeholders from the different various business units to make sure that they're included in that. And it doesn't have to be 10 people on a team. It isn't that. It just you need to have recurring touch points with the proper stakeholders to make sure that the organization is getting. That's the goal of this centralized team, right? So here's the thing, somebody should own it. If there's no ownership internally, right, it's going to be very difficult. So somebody has to own that and be held accountable, or some entity, right? This group of people could be it as well. So very important, but definitely dependent on size of team.
Cool. I think that wraps the episode, man. That's the 6 principles. So, to our listeners, head up to Tenacity.ai, check out the platform, download the Cloud Cost Optimization Handbook, give us feedback. We're constantly updating it, and tune in next time for more of a deep dive into FinOps and implementing it in your organization. Thanks for listening.